Hello, beautiful people. Now that you've got your outline and hopefully you've workshopped it as well, you're probably thinking, yes, I can start writing my screenplay. I can type those words, fade in, interior, exterior. Well, yes and no. Personally, before I start writing a scene, I like to know just where the hell it's taking place. If you'll indulge me, I'd like to quote the late and great Stanley Kubrick when he says, "Confront a man in his office with a nuclear alarm, and you have a documentary. If the news reaches him in his living room, you have a drama. If the news reaches him in the lavatory, the result is a comedy." It's not as simple as writing about the feel of the room, the decor, or trying to match a character's costume to their surroundings. I think I did a pretty good job. Instead, there should be intrinsic qualities to the space that imbue themselves in the proceedings. That is, the location shouldn't just be a place where stuff happens. It should actually be integral to why that stuff happens. I think filmmakers like Buster Keaton and Frank Tashlin and Charlie Chaplin, actually Jacques Tati was really good at this. They were all good, though, at finding ways of making objects in a space really play very well with the on-screen action. A more recent example, even though it's 20 years ago, is the kitchen scene in Kill Bill 1, where the bride and Copperhead are fighting with, just stuff they find in the kitchen, improvising weapons. I think that's a really great example of using the space as an integral way of playing it together with the scene. Now, when you're deciding where you're going to place a scene, the most obvious thing to ask is whether it's a private or public space. It's like probably the easiest distinction you can make. This is also where how much space there physically is can really change things. If you have a lot of space, that can make a scene play out very differently to if you're very sort of tight and compacted. Have you ever been stuck in the corner of the room conversing with someone you really don't want to be with, but because you're in the corner you can't get out? Now, in a romantic comedy, early on, when the characters kind of like have that tension with one another, you want to put them in the closest, smallest, most intimate location possible, like the back of a taxi, or an elevator shaft, or a stationery cupboard. You want to force them to be face-to-face with one another so that, their romantic feelings can bloom. And then, once they realize they love one another, you want to put them as far apart as possible, in a space where there are as many obstacles, both metaphorical and physical, as possible. You also want to think about eye line. Can the characters see one another? Can they not see one another? Do you want them to see one another? Should they be close enough to touch one another? Or should there be that denial of a touch? You can also start thinking about the lighting of your scene. For example, if you're doing a slasher horror, maybe you want to keep the villain in the shadows where the only thing you can see are their malevolent eyes and their grinning evil teeth. Which also means that since they're in the shadows, you don't know who the killer is until the final reveal. One of my favorite stories about lighting is on the making of Ingmar Bergman's Winter Light, where Sven Nykvist thought he was going to have a really easy job because the location was pretty much one church, so he thought he'd only have one lighting setup. And then Bergman insisted that they go to a very quiet church up in the north of Sweden and spend all day watching how the light changed over the course of the day. And actually, natural light is an incredibly complicated thing, especially as it changes over the day. I always rather like that story, and this raises a very important point about how important lighting is and how it can really change the mood. But also, your choice to put someone in shadow or not in shadow, again, can play with perspective. In the same way, you should also experiment with sound. Are there crickets, cicadas? What does that have to do with the time of day? Is there traffic? Are there school children? Is there machinery? Does it have a rhythmic sound? Are there airplanes overhead? Is there the whistle of an incoming missile? What I like to ask myself before I write a scene, and it directly tells you what the location should be, is something I learned from Jerry Lewis's book, The Total Filmmaker. It's a very simple question. Who is doing what to whom? It tells you three very important things. Who is the agent, that is the person perpetrating the act, what is the exact nature of that act, and who is on the receiving end. Yes, if I'm brushing my own hair, then I'm both the who and whom. Even then, if I'm dancing alone in my room, well, that's a private space, and so maybe I want to be private, but also, is there an eye line to the murderer outside who is about to kill me? Even if a character is alone, then maybe you want to put them in a public space, or maybe you want to put them in a private space. You want to determine what their relationship is with the untold masses. If there are two characters, then you want to start thinking about what is their proximity together. You start asking questions, is this an intimate space? Who is familiar with the space? Determining whether or not they should be very close together, or whether they should be very far apart, whether they should be intimate, or whether they should be distant. You can start actually building a relationship between the characters based on the location. Now, of course, location tells you an awful lot about characters, and so does costume. Costume is really important, especially because of the way that costume works either with or against your location. For example, if you see a man in a police uniform at a dinner party, either there has been a death, there's been a noise complaint, it's a dress-up party, or he's a strippogram who hasn't gotten naked yet. However, if you see someone in the police uniform either at a police station or a crime scene, chances are it's not a strippogram. The costume a character has, you can actually write into your screenplay. Very important to understand the context. Whether someone belongs in a space. For example, if you have someone with very ratty clothing in a beautiful Prada store, then what does that say? Do they really belong in that space? And it starts raising questions about why they're there, and it will influence the way they interact with the space. Even the way the staff will look at them. They're going to look a little bit out of place. And that actually plays upon their psychology. Do they belong in this space? Do they feel comfortable in this space? Are they familiar with this space? So remember, location can drastically change the way your scenes play out. In fact, it should be integral to the way that scenes play out. Start asking yourself who is doing what to whom, and then once you understand that relationship and what the activity is, start thinking, okay, well, what's a good location for this activity? Should it be a private space, a public space, an intimate space, a cold space? Should it be a space that the character is familiar in? Do they belong here? Do they not belong here? Are they getting attention? Do they not want that attention? Do they love that attention? Okay? Until next time, I'm Constantine. Please stay sublime.